Shall I? Good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming today to Ed's beloved Council on Foreign Relations to celebrate my dear Ed's long and well-lived life. If you wonder why you heard some music from films like Chariots of Fire, I don't know if you heard them well, but they were playing, or Blazing Saddles, or Lower, okay, thank you, or Blazing Saddles, or Superman, it is because Ed had worked and had edited some of these movies to make them suitable for television, and therefore bring more revenues to the directors and actors of those movies after these movies had been shown in movie theaters. You will hear later from the professional who worked with Ed how good and successful Ed was at this. Personally, I just want to talk about my Ed. I want to share with you how an extraordinary, loving man my dear Ed was. Gentleness, kindness, and generosity personified. For example, unbeknown to me, Ed had since 2018 written and rewritten 40 pages of instructions on what should happen when he passes away. Yeah. He shared these instructions not with me, but with his longtime friend and attorney, Steve Ingerman, with his friendly banker, David Aboudi, and with our dear nephew and godson, Henry Blechman. You will hear from him later. As always, this was to protect me from any stress or worry. That was love. For example, Ed wrote, "If I die in New York, contact such funeral home. If it is in East Hampton, please call the cantor, Deborah Stein, who is here, and tell her to do the service in English, because I don't understand Hebrew." He also wrote, "Please, no memorial, no sadness, no tears." That was easy for Ed to say. But if Magda has the strength, I would love a big party at the Council on Foreign Relations with the family, with my dear friends, my colleagues, to celebrate my long and happy, well-lived life. He wanted this at the Council here because Ed has been a very long time active member of the Council and a generous donor of the Council. He traveled with the Council members to Japan, to Korea. He even reached the frontier with North Korea. And he traveled to Kuwait, to Qatar, to Bahrain, to Israel. And I clearly remember with great emotion his huge retirement party right here in this St. Peterson room in 2004, after his 35 years at Warner Brothers. I must say, I have been very fortunate to be loved by Ed and to love him dearly for 51 years. We were going to celebrate our 50th anniversary last December 15, but Ed left me on October 17, a day after his 94th birthday. Friends often ask me, how did you meet this wonderful man? Well, I was myself a successful on-the-air journalist for the French language radio and television in Brussels, Belgium. I was coming often to the USA to interview politicians like Henry Kissinger or Nelson Rockefeller, or writer like Eric Siegel, or various actors and actresses, or personalities like the lawyer Rita Hauser, who is here tonight, and who became a close friend of mine. One day, at a dinner in Paris of many journalists, I was sitting next to the then speechwriter of President Nixon, William Safire, who told me, "Magda, when you come back to the States, I would like you to meet my very good friend, Edward Bleier." He said, he too is in television, but on the business side of it. So when I met this 43-year-old, very handsome man with beautiful, smiling blue eyes, so smart, so accomplished, and so gentle, it was for me, as we say in French, un coup de foudre. Yes, love at first sight. And from then on, being with Ed has been an incredible love story and a life filled with sharing experiences out of the ordinary. So just to name a few. A trip to China very early in the 70s, just after President Nixon opened China to the USA. You know what? Ed wanted to visit the famous animation studio in Shanghai. Or a trip in 1974 to Iran, on the invitation of the Shah and the Shahbanu, the Emperor and the Empress of Iran. A fascinating conference under the auspices of the Aspen Institute, a conference named Persepolis, Iran, its past, its present, and future, 1974. But no one in our group of the Aspen Institute could foresee that 5 years later, in 79, Ayatollah Khomeini would come back from his exile in France and would change that country forever to become the Islamic Republic of Iran. Then in 98, there was a trip to Indonesia and the Western Papua, then called Irian Jaya. There, the indigenous men, farmers and hunters, do not bother to get dressed except to cover their genitals with gourds. And topless women only wore skirts made out of grass. For them, pigs are very important. You won't believe me, but I even took a photograph of a woman breastfeeding, yes, a small pig. It all felt like we went back 1,000 years. But to our great astonishment, we could see television antennas on top of their huts. By the way, Ed brought back 75 of these gourds for his male friends here. But they basically used them only for decorative objects in their home. Then there were the wonderful trips to South America with our dear friends Leonard and Evelyn Lauder, to Ecuador, beautiful Galapagos, to Peru, and stunning Machu Picchu. I remember Leonard and Ed taking long hikes, and Evelyn and I taking great photographs. Those were wonderful times. Then there was a magic safari in Kenya with our niece Deborah, who's here, and the Button Weezers who are here. I also shared with Ed 15 biannual think tank conferences that Ed organized at the Aspen Institute, where he invited 60 senior leaders of the media industries to meet countries' presidents, prime ministers, scientists, Nobel Prizes to discuss not television, but political, economical, social issues, so the leaders of the television world could implement what they learned later into their future TV and cable programs. Then there was another extraordinary experience, a private dinner at President and Pat Nixon at their Casa Pacifica in San Clemente, suggested by their daughter, Julie Nixon Eisenhower. This was mid-70s. This was soon after President Nixon resigned in 74. You see, Ed had met Julie through his friend Bill Safire. The polls had proven that Julie was very popular among women in America, and Ed was very impressed by Julie. So he wanted to create a TV show called, quote, Ask Julie. But unfortunately, the networks were not ready for this show post-Watergate. We had such an interesting evening with President Nixon, his wife, Pat, and Julie. Mind you, this was much before President Nixon published his memoir in 78. So the conversation was very revealing about his opinions on leaders such as Brezhnev, Khrushchev, his admiration for de Gaulle, his opinion on the Chinese leaders, his view on America's status in the world, or the minorities in the USA, etc. For Ed, a forever Democrat, and for me, a journalist, this was a very informative and an unforgettable evening. And I must say, whatever your politics are, our hosts were extremely gracious. At dinner, President Nixon told me, you are French, so you will appreciate the Chateau Margaux 1955. And the next morning, after breakfast, before leaving, Mrs. Nixon offered me a basket filled with berries from her garden. By the way, that evening was supposed to be off the record, so you can imagine how I felt not being able to report on this exceptional evening. He hadn't talked to anyone at that time. So 2 weeks later, Julie called and said, after all, my father said if you want to report on that evening, you could, as long as your report is not to be shown in the USA. And so I was able to publish it in Paris Match. I was then the US correspondent of Paris Match. I don't know, but you know the famous French magazine. And also, I was able to syndicate my report in several European magazines, but not in the USA. To this day, we stayed very friendly with Julie. She's a remarkable woman. In fact, she responded to my invitation to this celebration, and here is an excerpt. We would be at the service, if at all possible, but we have a long-standing commitment in Normandy, France, for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Remember, her husband David is the grandson of General Eisenhower. But then she adds, in quotes, Ed was a multifaceted genius. He accomplished so much in so many fields. Ed was a genius for friendship, for love and loyalty, end of quote. Indeed, Ed was a very loyal friend. I always admired the 60 years friendship between Ed and his three best friends. And here is how it started. Bill Safire and Robert Menschel were roommates at Syracuse University. Ed and Maud Janklow, also at Syracuse, had been friends since age 7. Ed introduced Bill Safire to Maud Janklow, and the four of them, Ed, Bill, Bob, and Maud, became friends for the next 60 years. I used to call them the Four Musketeers. Sorry, Monsieur Alexandre Dumas, you wrote there were 3. For me, there were 4 Musketeers. Ed was the best man at Maud and Linda Janklow wedding, and Bill Safire and Maud Janklow were best men at our wedding in '73. Ed spoke beautifully at Maud's funeral 2 years ago. And Ed organized and emceed at not 1, but 2 memorials for Bill Safire, one in New York City and another one in Washington, D.C. And Ed, of course, would have loved to have his friends speak at his celebration right here. But Ed was the last of the 4 Musketeers to leave us. So, with the blessing of Bill Safire's son, Mark Safire, who is here today, you will hear later Bill Safire talking about his best friend, Ed Bleier, in a video from 2000. The very successful businessman, respected and admired by everybody for his integrity and decency, my Ed was no pushover, but he was always forgiving. So much so that I sometimes called him Candide, you know, the character of the philosopher Voltaire. Candide, who only saw the good side of people. If I would say, this person misbehaved, Ed, he would always find a psychological reason why that person acted this way. Maybe his parents were not nice to him, or another forgiving explanation. He was Candide. He also had a good sense of humor. He loved to say, my wife speaks 5 languages, but all of them in French. Or he would say, if you want a good marriage, find a partner who does not speak the same language. So when there is a difficult argument, it helps not to understand some angry words. I did say Ed was love and generosity personified. For example, being an insulin-dependent diabetic myself for many years, I wanted to raise money to find a cure for diabetes. So my dear Ed gave me the ultimate gift to raise almost $3 million in one evening. He gave me the opening of the famous Warner Brothers movie Twister, produced by Spielberg. Remember that movie in 1996? It was an extraordinarily successful event with a to New York. You will see some pictures of that gala later. Another example. Ed knew that I loved the Bartholdi sculpture of the Statue of Liberty. When we went to Monte Carlo so Ed could meet my parents, and by the way, they adored Ed. For the return to New York, Ed booked us on the magical ship France. Remember France? That luxury ship that exists no more. This was in '72. Yes, we were living in sin, as some would say, for a year before our wedding. That trip on the France was magical, dancing every night. He was a great dancer. Then on an early morning, on the ship, at 4 a.m., Ed woke me, come on, let's go to the deck. We were approaching Manhattan, and I, the French immigrant, so very closely, lit up in the morning sun, my favorite lady in the whole world, the Statue of Liberty. Now, fast forward a few years later. After I passed the immigration exam and became an American citizen, one day, arriving on the 4th of July at Ed's beloved East Hampton house, I noticed a big blue tarp on the ground. And I said, what is this tarp? And Ed answered, maybe the grass cutter did something, I don't know. A few hours later, to my great surprise, appeared many of our friendly neighbors and my family, and a tall, thin man, the East Hampton famous sculptor Bill King, with 2 other workmen, who proceeded to reveal what was under that blue tarp. An 18-foot metal sculpture of a fantastic, beautiful Statue of Liberty, which Ed had commissioned from Bill King for me, his beloved spouse, the new American citizen. And they placed it so well next to our pool. that at certain times of the year, believe me, her torch is lit by the sun's ray at sunset. Yes, my husband was a true romantic. Ed had been one of the first of our crowd to come to bucolic East Hampton. In 1962, BM, that means before Magda, Ed had purchased 6 acres of land from Hiddle to Middle Lane in East Hampton from a friend who owned half of the village, Evan Frankel. Ed, you sitting down? $10,000 an acre. And on the phone, he bought a farmhouse sitting on one of those acres, our little house. I renovated it later. 1 year later, to pay his loan, he sold a few acres that you won't believe it, $20,000 an acre. Yes, Ed adored East Hampton. Every weekend, he loved biking with his friend Bob Menschel, or played tennis with Steve Ross, unbeatable at the net, mind you, or with Steve Spielberg, or with Don Blinken, the father of Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, or played double with Pete Peterson, his wife Joan Ganscony, and me. Ed cared for the village and was for many years the chairman of the Academy of the Arts of Guildhall, the cultural center of East Hampton. He also was one of the regular umpires at the annual East Hampton Writers versus Artists baseball game, where sometimes President Clinton participated. They were really fun times. Ed never stopped being involved and cared for his beloved East Hampton. In fact, his caretaker, previously Steve Ross's caretaker, became the mayor of East Hampton for many years. And recently, the new elected mayor came to visit Ed in our home to discuss how to improve traffic, parking in our beautiful village. I was there. My Ed was a truly Renaissance man. He never stopped learning, reading, investigating, creating, looking into the future. Lately, he wrote 1,000 pages on the history of communication, which he worked on with Bob Thompson and Alex Morntountak from the Bleier Center for Television and Popular Culture, Ed endowed at the Newhouse School at Syracuse University. Despite his advanced age, Ed was very focused. He had a great memory. He remembered every name, every event of the business he knew so well. When several obits appeared about him, many friends told me they knew he was successful, but they were not aware of all his accomplishments. This is because Ed was very modest. He never bragged. Despite his great success, he was humble. You see, Ed was a self-made man. He was not born with a silver spoon, and he had lost his family early in life. At 18 years old, coming from school home to visit his parents, he found his mother on the kitchen floor, dead from a heart attack. A few years later, he lost his father. And 3 years after our marriage, he lost his only sibling, his older brother, Howard. I came with a big family, and Ed embraced them all, and they all adored my Ed. And when my younger sister, Rebecca, and her husband, Peter Blechman, produced 2 wonderful boys, Henry and Philip, these 2 became our beloved nephews and godsons. As you probably know, Ed and I did not have children, but we were blessed to have these godsons and our nieces, Deborah from Brussels, who is here, and Julie in Paris. I'd like to add, I don't think I would be here standing if I did not have the support, the love and care they all gave me after losing the man I loved so much. For example, Henry, despite being a busy businessman and very busy father, 2 little girls, Bree, 4.5, and Chloe, 11 months. Henry, whom Ed called his very best friend, has been an extraordinary, wise, and smart advisor to me after losing my Ed. You will hear from Henry later. Thank you.
Unforgettable, that's what you are. Unforgettable, though near or far. Like a song of love that clings to me how the thought of you does things to me. Never before has someone been more unforgettable in every way. And forevermore, that's how you'll stay. That's why, darling, it's incredible that someone so unforgettable thinks that I am unforgettable too. Unforgettable in every way, and forevermore, that's how you stay. That's why, darling, it's incredible that someone so unforgettable thinks that I am unforgettable too. Unforgettable, that's what you are. Unforgettable, though near or far. Like a song of love that clings to me, how the thought of you does things to me. Never before has someone been more unforgettable in every way. And forevermore, that's how you stay. That's why, darling, it's incredible that someone so unforgettable thinks that I am unforgettable too. Unforgettable in every way, and forevermore. That's how you stay. That's why, darling, it's incredible that someone so unforgettable thinks that I am unforgettable too. So unforgettable thinks that I am unforgettable too. Unforgettable in every way, and forevermore. That's how you stay. That's why, darling, it's incredible that someone so unforgettable thinks that I am unforgettable too.
Gosh, that last one was at my wedding. Thank you, Bada. We've called Magda Bada since I was a toddler, since apparently I couldn't say Magda at age 1, so it stuck. And so to us, she's Bada. I'm Henry Blechman, their nephew and godson, and along with my brother Phil, who you'll meet with shortly. We're going to hear from a wide range of voices from those who are in Ed's life. Incredible, diverse, lovely people who knew him, who worked with him, and who looked up to him. Regardless, everyone loved him. We'll hear from his family about his personal life, from former colleagues and partners about his extensive professional accomplishments, and from longtime friends over the many decades to share what a true mentor and mensch that Ed was. Ed was a long-standing member here at the council, and besides maybe East Hampton, I think this was his favorite place to be. But a few hours here couldn't possibly do Ed's lifetime experiences and accomplishments justice. In Ed's 94 years, he was as active as anyone. Most of you know well, over a 35-year tenure at Warner Brothers, he oversaw countless innovations, evolutions, and revolutions in the development of television and new media. As president of Warner Brothers' domestic pay TV, cable, and network features, he headed up the division which pioneered the aftermarket sales of Warner's TV series and movies, and under Ed, the great team there exceeded theatrical revenue. That's right. He worked closely with Warner's cable systems, helping develop basic and pay TV networks, which included MTV, Nickelodeon, the Movie Channel, and others. He co-created the corporate plan for Warner Home Video. He presided over Warner Brothers Animation, giving new life to Looney Tunes, overseeing over 100 variations of Looney Tunes programming on 10 different broadcast and cable networks, along with working with the likes of Steven Spielberg on Tiny Toons, Pinky and the Brain, and Animaniacs. We grew up with those. And he was a pioneer of new media markets, for example, delivering content on demand with pay-per-view. His work paved the way for how we often consume content today with streaming. All of that would make for a great resume, but there's so much more. Well before Warner, Ed's early experience was as a newspaper and broadcast journalist, including at Syracuse University, where he left in 1951, but then proudly went back to officially graduate in 1994, and he always made sure to let you know he was the class of '94. In the U.S. Army, he taught at the Psychological Warfare School. And if you ever wondered how he was such a great negotiator, that was probably a factor. Later, he joined the Dumont Television Network and New York's Channel 5. And then in the 60s, Ed held senior management positions with ABC Television as vice president in charge of daytime and children's programming and sales, where he managed network sales, marketing, public relations, and strategic planning. And he pushed to integrate the first African-American characters in daytime television. Later, after his 3.5 decades at Warner, Ed served on the boards of Real Networks, which was an early pioneer in internet media streaming, Blockbuster, where Ed was brought on by Carl Icahn, and CKX, which owns the American Idol and Elvis Presley franchises. In 2003, Ed published a New York Times bestseller. You saw a picture, The Thanksgiving Ceremony, which is, for all intents and purposes, the Haggadah for Turkey. You'll recognize the book's jacket endorsements, names like his good friend William Safire, Alan Alda, who's here with us, Julie Nixon Eisenhower, Peter Jennings, Quincy Jones, and Steven Spielberg. We'll hear from him in just a bit too. He was also incredibly active with various pro bono organizations. Ed organized the Aspen Institute's industry conferences, helping to manage 15 conferences over 3 decades. He was the chairman for the Center for Communication, president of the International Radio and Television Society, director, fellow, and president and vice chairman of the International Television Council, chairman of the Academy of the Arts of East Hampton's Guildhall, board member of the Martha Graham Dance Company, board member of the Keystone Center for Science and Environmental Policy, member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. It was always fun to see which movies and pictures and actors he would be voting for an Oscar. He was a longtime member and generous donor here at the Council on Foreign Relations. He was a longtime board member of the Dana Foundation, which is a critical organization helping to advance neuroscience. He co-chaired the Entertainment, Media, and Communications Division of the UJA Federation and received the UJA's Stephen J. Ross Humanitarian Award. He served on the Media Council of the Paley Center for Media and the marketing committees for the Museum of Modern Art and Syracuse University. And with Syracuse, he endowed the Bleier Center for Television and Popular Culture at Syracuse University's Newhouse School. And that was all just on Tuesday. Personally, we knew him as Uncle Ed. My brother Phil and I were incredibly fortunate to grow up with 2 sets of loving parents. With Ed and Bada, we had another set of parents who also genuinely cared for and mentored us. And Ed was the ultimate mentor. I think you're going to hear a common theme throughout the evening here, that he was the greatest mentor and the world's greatest, honest, trustworthy friend. He was always actively thinking about your situation and how to better it, probably more than you were thinking about your situation. The best feeling was when he'd say, "Hey, kid," followed by some incredible, generous, thoughtful activity you were about to partake in with him. He was my skiing buddy, my biking buddy, canoeing buddy, horseback riding buddy, my history buff buddy, my travel buddy, my movie buddy. Growing up, going to a movie with Ed, it was a bit different for us than it was for most kids. Some movies we went to at a normal theater, but pretty often there was the Warner movie premieres, and he'd bring you along, and you had to pinch yourself every once in a while because you'd see the stars themselves there and the execs behind it there at the lavish Warner after party. But you were there with the world's greatest professional mingler there making it happen. A CEO here, a head of the studio there, or based on where you were in a building like this, it was a high-profile diplomat here or an ex-president there. But it wasn't about that. It was that he would always include you. "This is my nephew, Henry." And he happily brought you into the conversation in a way where he almost made it seem like it was a privilege for those movers and shakers to meet you, a pimply teenage kid. He was everyone's trusted pal. He would engage anyone, and he was loved by everyone, from those CEOs and state leaders to the cashier at White Castle. In Bada, there were lots of trips to White Castle which you did not know about. I'm sorry, Ed. Many of you have been out to eat with him, whether it be at White Castle, or Michael's, or Nick and Tony's, or Rowdy Hall, or somewhere in between. And whenever he was dressed up, you knew there was some ketchup or some sauce or some condiment that would end up decorating his shirt or tie by the end of the meal. Well, this is one of those ties. It may be hard to see from afar, but this is a custom-decorated Ed Bleier tie. I'm keeping this forever. Just like there are so many things, the experiences, the wisdom, the endless guidance, curiosity, the insatiable hunger to keep learning to the very end. There are so many things Ed gave us that we get to keep forever. Ed lived an extraordinary, full life, and he always included you in it. And we get to keep that forever, so we're so much better for it. So thank you, Ed. We really can't thank you enough. Now, next on the program, I'd normally introduce Leonard Lauder, who is the emeritus chairman of the Estee Lauder Companies and a dear friend of the Bleiers. Unfortunately, he's under the weather today, so I now am excited to introduce to you my great, lovely cousin, Debbie Palacci.
Wow, that's impressive. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Deborah Palacci. I live in Belgium, and I'm the lucky and the very privileged niece of Magda and Ed. You all know Ed's amazing professional achievements. We've been through it. I mean, it's kind of busy. How hardworking he was, how busy as a bee, as a visionary man like no other one. What I want to share with you is the private man I knew as his niece. I met Ed for the first time I was 8 years old. I was surprised then. He was such a giant to me, tall. My Uncle Ed was so impressive, tall, strong, handsome to the little girl I was then. Most importantly, he was a warm and very tender man. Thanks to his beautiful smile, I felt surprisingly close to him and safe. Like no other adult before him, Ed took the time to get to know me, 8 years old, may I remind you, asking me about my feelings over everything in my little life, my school, my friends, and mostly my worries about my situation as a child of divorced parents. No one ever had done that before him. I didn't speak English back then, and honestly, his French was not better. But then, nevertheless, we found a way to communicate and to feel close. That was my Uncle Ed. Over the years, growing up, learning English, hopefully, at school, we helped me exchange more and more about everything with him. Yeah, I had the chance to travel to Kenya with Magda and Ed at the age of 20. This trip was clearly among the happiest moments of my life. Everywhere he'd go, he'd try all kinds of things, such as boat fishing on Lake Victoria, or we would enjoy talking around a fire after dinner and listening to the sound of the night in the middle of the Masai Mara plain. And less to say how curious and open-minded he was in every aspect of his life. I wished I had more time with him over the years. The physical distance and my adult life in Belgium did not allow me to do so. It's a deep regret. Ed was an amazing listener. He inspired me and served me well all my life. A man I always loved and admired for all these reasons and many more. He was so generous of his time and his love. He was definitely a family man. Every year, for almost 5 years, I came to spend some of my summer vacation here with Magda and Ed. And the weekends in East Hampton were precious, very precious moments for Ed. Back then, I did not realize how busy and how important he was. His responsibilities as a chairman here, a president there, a judge of the Oscars also. But when the weekend arrived, he was just Uncle Ed, taking me and my sister Julie from Paris to the beach, going to the movies, or simply enjoying family moments, talking to each other. Ed was so dedicated to his family. His name will be a blessing to my heart and to those who knew him. I thank Magda for choosing such an amazing man, for letting me be part of his family. He was a model of strength, integrity, this is something you will hear very often, courage and generosity throughout his life. I will always miss him. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henry Schleiff, and I think this well-deserved celebration of Ed's life here at this esteemed venue, the Council on Foreign Relations, is actually most appropriate in that Ed's greatest and most successful foreign relationship was with Magda, his incredibly devoted wife and a talented former French journalist in her own right. So first, a really heartfelt thank you to Magda for organizing all of this today. Those pictures, Magda, just fantastic. Better than anything I've seen on any streaming service anywhere. Terrific. It's been said that vision is the art of seeing the invisible. And in that regard, Ed Bleier was a true visionary. Quite simply, Ed was a prime mover in the growth and indeed complete transformation of the entire television industry. His contributions and achievements are too many and too impactful to recount here, but were well noted in the extensive obits that appeared at the time of his untimely passing. Suffice it to say, Ed was a pioneer and subsequently a leader in the rise of cable television, streaming, and the framework for what is today Warner Brothers Discovery, as he foresaw the need for fresh content in all forms to serve the ever-evolving means of distribution. Albert Einstein himself once said, and it was quoted as saying, that imagination is more important than knowledge. Ed Bleier had both. That said, Ed was more than a well-respected television executive. He somehow found time in his illustrious career to be both a successful author and a lecturer at, among other places, Syracuse University, where in 2005, its Center for the Study of Popular Television, part of the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communication, was renamed the Bleier Center for Television and Popular Culture. Additionally, Ed's pro bono and philanthropic leadership benefited every not-for-profit he so generously lent his efforts to, including the Aspen Institute, the Museum of Modern Art, IRTS, UJA Federation, Guildhall, the Dana Foundation, the Paley Center, and the Council on Foreign Relations, just to name a few. Indeed, if there was a common theme in all of Ed's work and achievements, it was that he sought not only to make a profit, but to make a difference. In that regard, however, I thought there was one glaring omission in all of the coverage of Ed's passing, and that was what a great mentor he was to so many, and what an even greater friend he was to all here today. I know personally that I owe Ed a big thanks for helping and guiding me in my own career. Certainly, if the definition of a best friend is the one who brings out the best in you, then like so many in this industry, we thank Ed for being such a best friend. I'll stop here because as one of Ed's beloved characters in his favorite animated cartoon series, featured, I think, in your program on the left page, Looney Tunes, would say at the end of each episode, that's all, folks.
Well, what can you say about a man who spent a large part of his adult life selling Looney Tunes? There's a carrot next to my phone. Whenever Ed calls, I bite off a chunk and answer, "What's up, Doc?" And yet there's a kind of elemental morality to what he has been doing. You know that in Ed's world, Roadrunner represents the forces of good, and that Wile E. Coyote will be frustrated and lose in the end. There are times, frankly, when some of us find ourselves identifying with Wile E. Coyote, but Ed never does. He got into television when Dumont, that's with an M, Dumont was a big name in town, and then sold ABC television the outlandish notion that money was to be made in the daytime. He must be responsible for $10 billion in sales for Warner Brothers. But he's proudest of being among those early few executives to insist on a minority presence on daytime TV. Yes, and I hate to use a dirty word in a mixed group like this, Ed's a liberal. And as he built up a tiny sum to conserve, he's failed to turn conservative, as so many of his sensible friends have. However, his somewhat crack-brained political outlook has not affected his interest in the cultural impact of what so many of us here tonight do. For decades on the steering committee of the Aspen Institute, Ed has put together eminent political leaders and grubby media tycoons and vice versa, and in the hope that some flicker of insight could be generated among them. In this most hotly competitive world, Ed Bleier has been compassionate and sensitive and caring. I see a lot of George W. Bush in him. But this Bleier was this way before it became manly. Ed and I, as Arun suggested, began back in Syracuse. He broadcast the ball games while I tried to impeach the chancellor. We both dropped out to get jobs in journalism, but Ed, he went back to Syracuse and studied a little more, picked up a couple of more credits and got his degree, as I never did. And to this day, I call on Ed for scholarly research in the English language. He is the man that grammarians honor for what we call the double positive. You've sometimes heard him say it. Yeah, yeah. A double positive, of course, is a negative. Now, there are a bunch of 50-year friendships here in this room tonight, which is kind of a rarity. In this fast-moving city and fast-changing media world, you don't find a bunch of 50-year friendships. It began nearly a half-century ago, as 50-year friendships do, when a bunch of young hotshots formed a group we called the Wednesday 10. At least 8 of them are here in the room tonight. Bob Menschel, the investment banker, Ed Meyer, the gray eminence, Jim Rosenfield, the broadcaster, Mort Janklow, the super agent, Bob Lifton, the Middle East peacemaker, Ed and myself. We meet twice a year on a Wednesday. And at first we met to impress each other. We spent a lot of time introducing each other. But now we meet twice a year to take each other down a peg. We met with wives only once. Because one of the wives turned to the other and said, "Isn't it wonderful how these guys meet every single Wednesday night?" And we have taken care of each other. Ed introduced me to my wife, Helene, and a few years later, Helene and I introduced him to his wife, Magda. We repay our debts. On a serious note, this is a business that has become not only hotly competitive, but a kind of one-time negotiation where you go for the throat and you deal with people who are strangers, and you don't particularly make friends while you're making deals. And I remember many years ago, Ed met Bill Paley and passed on some advice that Paley gave some people in the networks. And it was about negotiating and about making deals. He said, it's a small world and a long life. Leave a little something on the table. And so, at a time when all too many network executives and communications executives go to try to win everything and humiliate the opposition and triumph, and one man wins and one man loses, perhaps we lose sight of the need to leave a little something on the table. And in his years of negotiations and years of making deals, that's what my friend Ed Bleier has done, and that's why he's made so many good deals and so many good friends.
Hi, I'm Bob Daly. I was really a close friend of Ed Bleier. I've known him for over 5 decades. I first met Ed when I was running CBS, and he was at Warner Brothers. And he used to handle a lot of the film negotiations, and especially Bugs Bunny, who was very important to CBS. And we would have many negotiations. Sometimes they were pretty tough. But the one thing we learned at the end is that we always made sure each of us came out fairly. Because he was a good man, a very good man. And then later on, I left CBS and went to Warner Brothers. And I ran Warner Brothers with Terry Semel. And Ed was an unbelievable negotiator and a really good guy to have working for you. He worked harder than anybody else. The people in the company loved him. And I missed him when he left. I'm not sure I left before him or he left after me, but I saw him a few times in New York when I would go to New York. And the one thing about him is he loved his wife, loved his family, cared about everybody in the company. And I'll miss him. I really will miss him. And I just will have to say that he ranks as one of the top people we had at Warner Brothers during my tenure there. So, sorry I can't be there today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bob. I remember Bob had a plaque on his desk that read, "Shorter is better." Not a reference to height, but a recommendation to filmmakers that shorter movies are better movies. With that in mind, I'll try to keep my comments brief today. Good afternoon, I'm Eric Frankel. In 1980, I was ready to graduate from Syracuse University, and as a favor, a family friend recommended I reach out to Ed Bleier, a Syracuse alumni, for early career advice. In my meeting with Mr. Bleier, he hired 21-year-old me on the spot. Oh, gosh. And for the next 20 years, he was my boss and Warner Brothers my home. I'm honored to be here today representing the hundreds of Warner Brothers executives that worked with Ed, and I know he'd be pleased that so many of our colleagues from across the country are here today in person or via video, including former clients like Michael Fuchs and Steve Sheffer and Henry Schleiff and Tom Freston. Although there are literally endless Ed Bleier anecdotes, Magda asked me to keep it to 2 today, where I'm going to illustrate how impressive Ed at work was to me. The first story I call Ed and His Famous Friends. Our division, as you probably heard, licensed Warner Brothers movies to network television and a new business called pay TV. And as was previously mentioned, but most people still don't know, is that we actually generated very often more revenue per movie than the films made in the theaters. And during Ed's tenure, he generated billions and billions of dollars for Warner Brothers. He was the consummate deal maker. Once a movie was sold, it needed to be edited for broadcast, and the version had to be approved by the film's director. Accordingly, Ed told me stories, and I eventually saw all of this come to pass, of working and being friends with the likes of Clint Eastwood, Mel Brooks, Stanley Kubrick, Sidney Lumet, Steven Spielberg, and the list goes on and on. He not only got them record license fees, but they also loved him because he respected the integrity of their films. I remember one negotiation that involved the network version of Blazing Saddles, and whether or not it could include the name of Madeline Kahn's character, Lily von Stupp, which it did after Ed was done negotiating. He also got standards and practices to accept the cowboys eating beans around the campfire scene, including all the hilarious sound effects. Now, in particular, I remember Ed telling me that he had worked closely with the director Alan Pakula and Bob Redford on the network version of All the President's Men. To 22-year-old me, this sounded unlikely. We were in New York, not Hollywood. One day, Ed stops by my office, like he often did, and says, "Come take a walk with me." That was code for, "Let's go to Dunhill, I need some cigars." As we crossed the lobby of the Warner Communications building, I spotted a really good-looking guy in blue jeans, a chambray shirt, and really cool cowboy boots entering the revolving door. Yes, it was Robert Redford. And then I heard, "Ed, how have you been?" Redford, holding out his arms, gives Ed a big bear hug. Suddenly, the unlikely was real, and to me, Ed was Hollywood. One of the many things that made Ed such a great executive, and why the creative community adored him, everyone from Barbra Streisand to Mel Blanc, from Quincy Jones to Joel Roberts, who created the Woodstock Festival, was his love for the business and for programming. Ed, as you heard, was a fan. He adored movies, television, and of course, his beloved Looney Tunes characters. The second short story is Ed rolled with the big dogs, I call it, but even Ed had a real boss. Ed, as you've heard, was also good friends with the CEOs of the world's largest media companies, for instance, Chuck Dolan. And we would regularly go and meet with these executives. And Chuck Dolan, if you don't know him, helped invent modern-day cable TV, HBO, AMC, Bravo, and owned Madison Square Garden, the Knicks, and the Rangers. And one memorable trip to meet Chuck ended with a big lunch in Bethpage, right out of The Sopranos. As we drove back to Manhattan, I was surprised, and this seems to be a running theme here, when Ed unexpectedly turned off the LIE, looked at me sideways, and asked, "Can you keep a secret? If Magda finds out, she'll kill me." "What's the secret?" I asked. "We're going to White Castle." We each ate 4 steamed hamburgers, and between bites, Ed said to me, "Eric, do you know that Magda would rather me have a girlfriend than have a White Castle?" So I kept the secret until today and learned the secret of who Ed's real boss was. We're all here because, as everyone has heard already, Ed was one of a kind. He was a game changer. He changed the way you think, act, behave, lead, follow, treat others, love other people. As we've heard today, he was a visionary, saw business opportunities and possibilities where others didn't even notice. And when the world was a 3- and 6-channel broadcast television landscape, he envisioned it becoming the place where we can all watch anything, anywhere, anytime. He was open-minded, democratic, and fair. He worked to make New York City, East Hampton, and the planet a better place to live. He took chances and let his team take chances. He was my mentor and a mentor to scores of other young people, most of whom went on to become great executives. If you had the skill set or potential, he'd give you enough rope to almost hang yourself and then help you out when you got in a jam, and there are plenty of those stories too. He had a big heart, and I'll close with this quote from Ed, who attributed his success to feeling as though you're doing the right thing, being skillful, delivering, not getting lost in idealism, staying very practical and very quantitative, but always looking ahead, not backwards. Ed, we'll miss you. And Magda, thanks for inviting me today.
Magda, I have to tell you how very sorry I am for your loss. I was a temp the whole time I was at Warner Brothers, but it was hard to believe that that's what I was because Ed never treated me that way. I have never worked any place where I felt more at home and more a part of everything. And it was due to Ed and Eric and Carrie and everyone there. I think about the time there, and I believe the comfort of working at Warner Brothers started at the top. It started with Ed. He appreciated us. He appreciated us all. I've never, ever worked any place where I felt more comfortable, and it almost didn't even feel like work on some days. So I am eternally grateful for those memories. I'll never let them go.
Hi, everybody. Magda, thanks for having me. My name is David Goodman, and I've always, in thinking about this, I've always loved this quote from Audrey Hepburn. As you grow older, you will discover that you have two hands, one for helping yourself and the other for helping others. To me, no one embodied this more than Ed. While many recognized his contributions as a media executive, I know firsthand as I worked for Eric and Ed for many years and as original programming exec, and Ed was also smart enough to know that I should never have made that remake of Lancelot Link's Secret Chimp. But what stood out to me was his deep commitment to improving the world and his community. Ed had a passion for pop culture, work, entertainment, politics, the arts, and foreign policy. His network was a dynamic mix of leaders from all walks of life. Like the line from Reggie Jackson, Ed was just the straw that stirred the drink. Ed was one of the most intellectually curious people I've known. He wasn't just passionate about issues and ideas. He put in the hard work, dedicating his time, energy, and money. Everyone talks about giving back, but Ed really and truly lived it. That's why this is the perfect venue to hold his memorial, given the work with the Council for Foreign Relations and his love for people, policies, ideas, and charity. Whenever I heard in the office about who he had dinner with the previous evening or what he was working on, I felt a sense of awe and wonder. As someone who grew up in a small town in northern Indiana, I was always fascinated by his interactions with people, projects, and believed that Ed's diverse interests made him an even more effective leader and executive. His broad insights and relationships allowed him to approach opportunities with unique perspectives, emphasizing that true success includes making a meaningful impact on the world, which is a lesson that I've learned from Ed that I've taken to heart and I've tried to go ahead and practice over the years. As I shared with Magda about a month ago, I was in Israel on a volunteer trip, and I found myself drifting to a conversation I might have had with Ed, knowing that I was going to be doing this talk today. I think it would have gone something like this. The first thing he likely would have said was, "Goody, you might have thought about leaving the day before Iran started bombing Tel Aviv." But after that, we would have had an inspiring and insightful conversation about Israel, Palestine, and 2,800 years of turmoil and history. I would have liked that. To me, Ed's legacy lies in his contributions to education, community, culture, ideation, and charity. He was a role model for what an executive can and should be, extending far beyond the office. Magda, the world needs more people like you and Ed, and we're all fortunate to have been part of his orbit.
He was a tremendous impression on my life. I had just graduated from his alma mater, my alma mater, Syracuse. My husband graduated from Syracuse. I remember interviewing with Pam Schloss, Gary Hahn, and going in and meeting Ed and just thinking, this guy is larger than life. I've got so much to learn here, and I did. I felt like I learned so much in the 3 years that I was at Warner Brothers. I could take on the world. I remember leaving the job at some point, going out to San Francisco. I moved out to San Francisco for about 2 years. I worked in the tech field and then came back. But all of that was because he had built up my confidence so very much. I do remember a time when I had said to Ed Bleier that I loved, Turner Classic Movies. And then I remember Ted Turner coming through the office and Ed Bleier walking Ted to my desk and introducing Ted Turner to me. I could not believe it. I was floored. So it's just stuff like that, that he remembered. He remembered I made that comment and made it a point to walk Ted Turner over to my desk. So he was just someone who was he listened, and he was very, very good at guiding.
I'm Christine Labrecque, and I worked for Ed Bleier at Warner Brothers in the 90s. I was on Ed's pay-per-view team, his favorite, but worst named group, at a time when home video and DVD rentals ruled the movie business. But Ed saw the future, and he pushed us relentlessly to make the on-demand viewing of movies the norm. All these years later, I think about Ed all the time. Every time I sit down to watch a movie or TV show on any streaming service, every time I scroll through the menu and just press a button, I think about Ed and about how his vision became reality.
Hi, my name is Shelly Palmer, and Ed Bleier was a dear friend of mine. As I reflect upon my shared moments with Ed, both personal and professional, I'm reminded of the magnitude of his influence on the industry and on those of us who were fortunate enough to have known him. I met Ed in the summer of 1978. I was a film TV major at NYU, and I needed to fly to Los Angeles for my very first industry meeting. My television production teacher told me that if I was going to go to LA on business, I had to fly first class and book a seat on American Airlines Flight 1 out of JFK. I'd never flown first class or even thought about it, and I told him, to my knowledge, I think the back of the plane's going to get there about the same time that the front of the plane gets there. He said, if you sit in first class, you may meet someone important. I had no idea how right it would turn out to be. As the plane took off, the guy sitting next to me took out about 15 industry trade publications and started reading them. And he noticed that I was eyeing the magazines on the armrest, and he said, "Want to borrow one?" Of course, I agreed, and after a few minutes, Ed looked over and in that classic Ed way said, "Are you in the business?" I laughed and I said, "Not yet." Over the next 5 hours, Ed taught me more about the business than I imagined possible. It was a combination of the history of film and TV, the current media landscape, and his ideas about what was going to happen to the cable TV industry over the next few years. During the flight, he asked me about the meeting I was going to, and he walked me through the strategy he thought I should use to handle it. It was spot on, of course. I can't say that I owe my career to Ed Bleier, but I absolutely owe landing that first project to Ed. Ed was my very first real industry contact, but over the years, he became so much more. A mentor, a personal advisor, an honest sounding board, a very enthusiastic cheerleader, a font of endless information and insight, and of course, most importantly, a cherished and dear friend. Ed had an uncanny ability to see the potential on the horizon before others even saw the horizon. We often talked about the next wave of media transformation. He'd opine, as he loved to do, about every aspect of the business. He had immense foresight, and he loved to predict what the next big shift was going to be. He was always thinking several steps ahead. Of course, our conversations weren't limited to shop talk and industry events. We shared countless personal moments. He would regale me with his tales of his early days in journalism. He loved to talk about his time at Syracuse, where I now teach. And he had amazing memories to share about the remarkable William Safire and his relationship with him. I never grew tired of Ed's stories. He was a voice of wisdom and experience, and I miss him terribly. During one of our last conversations, we spoke for almost an hour about misinformation, deepfakes, and how AI would play a role in the future of media and communication. Ed never stopped thinking about the future. He never stopped asking questions. He never accepted that anything was simply inevitable. Ed cared deeply about leaving the world better than he found it. And I think I can speak for everyone who knew and loved Ed Bleier when I say we are all better off for having had him in our lives. May Ed's name be for a blessing, and may he rest in peace.
Ed is really a soulmate for the person in whose name this award is being given. And so tonight, I would say there are two people who should be up here receiving the award with Ed. The first is clearly Magda Bleier, who is the true inspiration for Ed, and Ed has simply been a front man all these years for Magda. And I believe that the spirit of Steve Ross is with us this evening, with Bert, Marty, and Ed, because in fact, Ed and Steve were really, for me, how I came upon what some people thought was a profound merger of Warner Communications and Time Inc. And when you think about it, Ed has done a heck of a lot more than conduct those communication seminars at the Aspen Institute and sell that program. He's really been and was, with Steve, the repository of our institutional wisdom and true strategic vision. And I actually personally owe a lot to him. And this gives me a chance to say publicly that Ed and Steve, for me, had the same great, generous spirit, the same kind of relentless curiosity, and most of all, they really cared, and Ed really cares. And so it couldn't be more appropriate to have this award, which Ed, in fact, inspired to be named after Steve, because in his career, Ed, and we've all worked with Ed, everybody in this room, he taught us that achieving success can be done without sacrificing integrity. And so he lived in business what I think UJA stands for, and that is the moral commandment that's at the root of our Judaism and is the reason that we celebrate tonight. And it's my true honor to present to Ed Bleier this award, which is named after our hero, Steve Ross. Ed?
Lovely. Thank you very much.
To be a fundraiser and to be called a humanitarian is like calling a painter an artist. But to be honored along with Marty Pompadour is itself a bit humbling. I've just adapted the line from the commercial that Marty represents the fact that integrity doesn't hinder performance, in Marty, integrity is performance. Thank you, Marty, for being my partner in this enterprise. And at a time at my work at Warner Brothers and at Time Warner, and soon to be AOL Time Warner, as I'm going of counsel and reducing my professional workload, this is an evening of pasts and futures. The past, and I wish I'd be around even more in the future with my great colleague Barry Meyer as he takes our enterprise onto its next level, which he is surely quite able to do and has brought us this far. To my team in New York, it's the best group, the best team one could coach and lead and inspired by and give inspiration to, and I thank them for 20 years of dedication. And I'm not going to get into all the names, they know who they are. I am the first generation of Americans that both my mother and my father and his family were helped 100 years ago by some of these same agencies we all help tonight. Is not an honor, it's an obligation. But in a way, more importantly, is that this is media, communications, and entertainment, and that our obligation is not unlike that of people who also deal directly with the public on critical issues. And in addition to our fundraising and our good deeds, as a professional, and one of the things that Jerry Levin has cranked up to its highest form at our organization is a value system. And if nothing else, and without getting too self-conscious in our obligations to entertain and inform, at least we can adopt that aspect of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. That Magda and Henry and Philip, our godchildren, have been such an inspiration, reminds us that ultimately it's all about family, it's all about people, and I thank all of you people tonight for showing up, spending your money for a good cause, and honoring Marty and me. And lastly, to get the award in Steve's name, who I thought was a friend, a colleague, and a professional inspiration, to think that Steve was one of the world's great professional architects is even more inspiring because my introducer, my friend and my colleague, Jerry Levin, has taken that architecture indeed to several levels beyond. So in my acknowledgement to all of you, to Steve, to the award, to Jerry, and thank you for coming and thank you for honoring me.
Hold the phone.
I think I drew the short straw today because nobody else has to follow Ed Bleier. Magda, really, I think. And I'm going to speak about Ed not as his professional colleague, since I never was one, but as a friend. Although in the case of Ed, as I think all of you know, that distinction is actually pointless, because one of the key facts about Ed is that while some of his friends, like me, were not his professional colleagues, just about all of his colleagues were his friends. Or they became them, as you've heard, very, very quickly. This is all the more remarkable because of what friendship meant to Ed, how seriously he took it, and how, for him, it was always intertwined with generosity. That opening line that those of you who remember when there were such a thing as polite shopkeepers know that you would always hear from them, "May I help you?" could have been the watchword of Ed's friendships. For all that Ed did, for all that he accomplished, I think what he really saw himself as was as a catalyst, as a stimulus to others. To him, every friendship was an invitation to do something, an opportunity to connect to another life and help that friend achieve something he or she might not otherwise have done, but for that happy intersection whether on an airplane or somewhere else, of their life and Ed's. Now, it's common in these days of hype to talk in superlatives, to refer to somebody as the best, the greatest, the most incredible, the most brilliant. And of course, we could say any of these things about Ed, because they'd be true. But even so, Ed would not have liked it, because I don't think he saw himself that way. I will not pretend that he was modest. He knew he had contributed an enormous amount to the development of television and all that it came to represent in his lifetime, and even more to the future of it. And he was justifiably proud of all that. But he was never somebody whose sense of himself was defined by his professional accomplishments. His greatest qualities were ones that had nothing to do with hype. They were maybe even the opposites of it: decency, tolerance, caring, and, as I've just said, enabling the accomplishments of others. And he was interested, of course, in everything, including things that were unlikely to play any kind of direct role in his work. When Ed called or emailed me, it was never to talk about the daytime programming lineup, but to tell me an idea he had for an architecture column I should write. Or maybe to say a column I'd written in the New York Times or the New Yorker had been a little too kind about a certain building that Ed truly couldn't stand every time he walked past it. Or maybe, conversely, that I'd been a little too harsh about one that he liked. He would always, of course, tell me the reasons, and they would always actually make sense, because Ed was startlingly observant, as much so about buildings and streets and places as he was about people. He looked at his two favorite places, New York City and East Hampton, the same way he looked at his friends, as stimulating and meaningful presences in his life that he wanted to help in any way he could. He cared about them. Indeed, to Ed, both of those places were his friends. And when they disappointed him, he felt not angry, but let down by a friend from whom he'd expected better. He looked at New York that way. He believed passionately that the places he loved, like the people he loved, were always capable of getting better and accomplishing more. Now, I spoke a moment ago about happy intersections, and my friendship with Ed was a product of them. Unlike many of you in this room, I actually knew Magda first. We met when I was an undergraduate at Yale, and I was interviewing the author Eric Siegel, and Magda was writing a profile of him for Paris Match. And Eric, in search of efficiency, decided both interviews would happen at the same time. And we ended up traveling together with him, and never mind Eric Siegel, the great thing I took from that was a friendship with Magda. We stayed in touch, and one day Magda wrote to say that she'd married some man named Ed Bleier, and she'd moved to New York, and could I please come to brunch at their apartment? And so I did, and there in that old apartment before they moved to 64th Street when they lived near the Guggenheim, overlooking the park, I met Ed and Warner Leroy and a whole lot of other people, some of whom may even be here, who in time would become friends and have a great impact on my life. Happy intersections, again, all due to Ed and Magda, whose warmth suffused that apartment and still gives me happy memories of that brunch more than 4 decades ago. Later, when I met and married my wife, Susan, she ended up quite by coincidence as an executive of Warner Amex, the company that started Nickelodeon and MTV and Showtime, and in whose creation Ed played a critical role as one of Steve Ross's key advisors. She and Ed became professional colleagues, another happy intersection. And then Susan and I came to East Hampton, where knowing Ed and Magda was key to everything. Happy coincidence number 4, although by then I had stopped counting. And then our son developed type 1 diabetes. And Magda, who, as she told us, had been dealing with the disease herself, became a trusted advisor and source of support. An intersection that maybe wasn't as happy, but every bit as meaningful. And then when that led Susan to start the New York Stem Cell Foundation to stimulate advanced research, Ed was right there as an advisor and supporter, once again enabling the accomplishments of others. And Susan would have been so touched and so honored by Ed's wish that among the many worthy organizations that contributions in his memory could be made to was hers. We can measure friendship in many ways, and one of them, I think, is durability over time. I think of our friendship with Ed as being a great arc, covering almost every part of my life and Susan's life and connecting to almost everything we did, and of there being both there to offer support and help. It is friendship, but it is also love. And where love is concerned, where the ability to give love is concerned, there we have to use superlatives no matter what Ed would have thought of them. He was the best, the kindest, and the most loving friend there could be. Thank you.
It's a real privilege to discuss my friend Ed Bleier, who lived his life with grace. Ed defined an industry, he brought that grace to our industry, and now we live in his memory. I will always remember the impact he had on our industry, the boys, the girls, the men, the women. And up in Syracuse, you can see the life that he tried to live and all the things he tried to bring to our industry. I miss him, I miss Magda, but he was a special friendship, a special individual who I will go to my grave remembering and admiring. Thanks, Ed. It was a privilege.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Hyman. I come from a completely different part of Ed's life, which is the Charles A. Dana Foundation. So this is another story, though, even if it's a different part of his life, where Ed is entirely recognizable for his kindness, his decency, his ameliorative view of the world, always trying to repair the world, and his boundless curiosity. I joined the Dana Foundation board 20 years ago, and I'm now the chair, but Ed was already on the board, and it was a little bit forbidding. I'm an academic. I came down for meetings from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the members of the board were, unlike me, didn't earn their living and pay taxes on a W-2. And the members of the board, other than Ed, all had met as advanced men in the Nixon campaign, including Bill Safire. So even though it was a polite and very constructive set of relationships, David Mahoney, who was then the chair, had decided that the Dana Foundation should be working on this incredible frontier at the time of neuroscience, and I was a neuroscientist very conveniently. It was very much a dislocating experience for me, just very different, but there was Ed, and his warmth filled the room. He reached out to me, and we pretty instantly hit it off. And when I would come to board meetings, seeing Ed always made me feel better. Well, that's not very different from a lot of stories we've heard, but what happened, as often happens in organizations, and again, there's this theme that Ed never let moss grow on him. The themes, the programs that the Dana Foundation was funding were very successful. We were self-congratulatory. They grew old. They grew fusty. And some years later, a colleague of mine who was the head of the Neurology Institute at NIH said that what we were funding had become sort of like rounding error, and now the nation's $6 billion a year investment in neuroscience to treat various diseases. By this time, I had become board chair, and it was time to really change things. And I can tell you, it was really quite uncomfortable, right? People were very proud of what they had done, but time had passed, had lost touch. And Ed, by this time, it was not that many years ago, he was obviously curious about everything, but not a scientist, but he had this incredible intuition about what we had to do. And we had a series of meetings and dinners so that people would feel comfortable with whatever changes had to be made. And Ed was just an absolute stalwart of this. And again, just as I heard about in his career, he was always looking to the future, always trying to figure out what was coming and what could we do. And I think we came to a really interesting place in terms of our grant making, which is to think about science and society, and especially neuroscience and society. But I think all of us know as citizens now, just think back to the wars about vaccinology or about stem cell biology and the distrust of expertise. And all of a sudden, we'd gone from, casting about for what to be done to something that really was in Ed's sweet spot, which was communicating with the broader world, with the public about what was important, what science did have to offer, why we shouldn't be giving up on it, turning our backs on it, and also doing it as he talked about it. It was a bit late to get him out on the road, to do it with real integrity and to think about how one would communicate as effectively as possible. And then as Ed's health started to fail him, he nonetheless came to every board meeting. He had an attendant who brought him in a wheelchair, and Ed was sort of got himself up and ready and participated in a wonderful way in these meetings, always curious. And I could tell you more about that, but what was really important was here's another example of this man who, instead of being self-satisfied with what the foundation had been doing, saw that we needed to think about the future, was able to participate in asking, what can a small foundation actually do that makes a difference, that isn't rounding error? What does society need? And then once we thought about it, how we would begin to communicate it. In the last meeting he attended but one, it's very interesting. I heard this, again in some of the other talks. He had become fixated not only on science and society and the ethics of doing science and what it meant. He was very focused on AI and where it was going and how we were going to think about it. And I'm only terribly sorry that he isn't still with us, because there's a lot of people who talk about the dangers, the risks of AI, the benefits of AI, but meet it with hand-wringing or throwing their hands up or saying it's too hard or I can't learn about it. And insofar as he could, he had already started to dig in, to think about what's called the alignment problem, that is how AI aligns with human values. And I imagine that he wouldn't have let Wile E. Coyote win this one either. So thank you very much, and it's really an honor to be here with you.
Well, I have the great privilege to, every day when I go to work, Ed Bleier's name is on the door that I walk in. Incidentally, my name is not on that door. Ed's name is on that door. And I've always kind of thought I shared that office with Ed. And even when I go back on Monday, that Ed's working from home now, but it's still kind of Ed's office. The Bleier Center is, in my opinion, the happiest place in the Newhouse School, the happiest place in Syracuse University, and maybe the happiest place in Syracuse itself. And Ed very much planned with me what that space was going to do. We kind of thought of it as Pee-wee's Playhouse, a living room which would invite people from the community, anybody who would want to come. We have lunches, free lunch every Tuesday, Tuesdays with Bleier, it's called. And it really attracts, I almost think it almost an Ellis Island of the university. Anybody can come, anybody can be happy. And we do serious screenings, we do silly screenings, depending on what's happening. One of the recent ones is the semester ended when Cowboy Carter dropped. We showed 2 episodes of Beyonce when she was 18 in sitcoms. No kidding. And but at the same time, we'll do all kinds of fun things. I want to briefly just celebrate, we've heard about Ed as an industry titan and a philanthropist and a family member. I wanted to bring up Professor Ed Bleier, because I've seen him in many occasions talk to my students, and he's come, even when COVID came and we were on Zoom, I was teaching a class of 100 people. Ed saw fit to sign in and participate in that class. And let me tell you, he can hold a room of 20-year-olds like you would not believe. And yes, he can talk about the ye olden days of the Dumont Network and the newlywed game, but he was, as so many of you have pointed out, at the very state of the art up to the second of what was going on. When we think of the, grandpa asking the 4-year-old to come in and program their phone or whatever, Ed was talking about AI, was talking about streaming, again, way beyond what most people had as well. He really was an intellectual. I have been toiling in the groves of academe for over 40 years, and there are very few colleagues I have had who were as smart, as insightful, as truly intellectual among all those fancy academics as Ed Bleier was. I really considered him one of us in many ways. I invite any of you who are ever in the environs of Syracuse to please stop up to the Bleier Center, and especially if you can be there on a Tuesday. Ed very much still lives in Syracuse. Ed is still very much there. His name is mentioned. He is talked about there. We really make I think, a happy effort to keep the things that he stood for. And if you look at the main window in that office, it looks out on a Syracuse University that was almost exactly the one that Ed went to. It looks out into the old buildings that were there when Ed was there. In many ways, it goes back into time. Ed mentioned that once when he came in. I'm 64 years old, which is about the age Ed was when I first met him 30-some odd years ago. And I only hope that I can spend my next years being as gentle, as kind, as funny, and Ed Bleier was hilarious, those of you who knew him did. You sometimes wouldn't know how hilarious until about 10 minutes after he said something that was hilarious, but he was. Anyway, I hope that all of the data and light and other things that Ed has filled my head with in the half of my life that I've known him are something I can take to my own students and continue to fulfill that spirit that all of us have been talking about.
I'm one of those academic refugees whose life has become better because I landed at the Ellis Island that is the Bleier Center. I'm Alex Morntountak, and while I've only met Ed some 6-7 years ago, I've known him since he was a kid, which is the benefit of working with him on his oral history project, a project to which his friend, my mentor, Bob Thompson, very kindly and very thoughtfully attached me. So through Bob's and my own discussions with Ed, I got to know this kid who would ride the train every day, an hour and a half from Laurelton, Queens to Far Rockaway, because there he could be the editor of the school newspaper, he could be involved in student government. So in other words, he could network. And we all know Ed could network. He could also cable, but that's another story. Now, what fascinated me about Ed, and what continues to fascinate me about Ed, is that his stories, even those of his more challenging times, almost always involved a friend, but an actual friend. And they were always centered on the unwavering belief that Ed could get something done. He did not get that confidence from an easy childhood. He did not get it from any guarantee of success other than his own persistence or stubbornness, depends how well you knew him, and from his love for what he did. And this was the kid who would repeatedly sneak into the 1939 World Fair to catch the Futurama a few dozen times, to get free soup from Campbell's and free beans from Heinz, and to marvel at that magic box in the RCA pavilion that would become his life. This was the kid who'd grow up to sneak into Studio 8H, now home, of course, to Saturday Night Live, to hear Toscanini rehearse and to get chastised by the man once he caught him. And this was the kid who, in his college years, found brothers in Bill Safire and Dick Clark, even doing a show together called Say Hello from the Leaving Center and Dormitories of Syracuse University. Granted, they did the show to meet girls. But if we're honest, it's the same thing with the Trojan War, and at least Ed's horse was not hollow. Now, listening to Ed talk about his life in and out of television was a pleasure and an enduring surprise. The man forgot nothing, and he was nearing his 90s then. He would go off on a 10-minute side note, and he could come back exactly where he left off, having tied everything in where it belonged. Of all of those stories, I want to share just a couple examples. One is about a business he set up during a break from his network days. Ed and his partner organized ski weekends to Vermont, plane tickets and hotels for only $39. The thing is, it cost them $59. So it wasn't a great business, but it was great fun. And that is why they kept at it for a minute. And we've heard about how Ed always looked to the future, and one of the lines that he loved was that he was not like those generals that always fought the previous war. He could identify the next one, and he could design his strategy, and sometimes he needed a break to do that, and he needed his friends. Another story is about the anti-Semitism he faced, often masquerading as media critique. He would counter that the Jews didn't run the media, they were run into the media, because they weren't allowed to make it anywhere else. It took him a minute to realize that he's not the Christ killer and that he had found a place where he could really show off his talents. The last story is his honest respect and love for Steve Ross. Of the many things he admired about Ross, Ed always spoke about his determination to warehouse talent, as he called it. And it is something that Ed himself always did. His attitude, as he credited Ross with inspiring it, was find the best people, keep them happy, and you will get worthy things done because talent is always at work. The people are always at work. So this full room and Ed's full life prove he did exactly that. And the Bleier Center exists to do exactly that. Now, I owe Ed a Marshall McLuhan reference because he loved him. So here it is, slightly altered. The talent is the message. The rest are simple conduits. And of his many talents, Ed was especially keen on recognizing both the message and the media at all times. A day before he passed, his last words to me were some notes on an article in the previous day's media section of the Times. Such was his determination, such was his unrelenting devotion to making things happen. What I mean by all this is, I don't know about faiths, I don't know about afterlife beliefs, and any of that. I have no idea where Ed is right now, but what I do know is they're about to get cable.
Hello, everyone. My name is Phil Blechman. I am Ed's godson and nephew, and I have been honored to relay some other messages from beloved friends who were not able to be here. The first is Jeff Bukes, the former CEO and chairman of the board of Time Warner, who said, "Ed was a good friend and a brilliant executive, very decent and well-loved by all of us who had the pleasure and honor of working with him. I learned a lot from him and laughed a lot with him." From Bruce Raymer, the attorney for Clint Eastwood, he said, "Eddie was a dear friend and a loved comrade. I spent many hours with him and talking with him while he was at Warner's. There has never been a better man than Ed. He will be remembered and missed by all who knew him." From Dan Romanelli, the former president of Warner Brothers Consumer Products, he said, "Ed was a legend, friend, and a great colleague who I so admired and enjoyed working with. I ran the consumer products division of which Bugs Bunny and the Looney Tunes were so successful and remain so today. Ed's relationship with the networks was instrumental in selling and building the enormous success that the Looney Tunes enjoyed and so making my job a lot easier. Bugs and I will always be grateful to him." I wasn't sure what I wanted to say today because I remember when Ed would tell us about this day as opposed to what his funeral was going to be, that he wanted today to be a celebration. And since his funeral in the fall, I've thought, what did he want today? And I didn't know it until the last month. So I recently, yesterday, got back from tour where I was lead producing a new show. And I've been listening to everyone in the room talk about how Ed always looked to the future. He never looked in the past. And every time I hear somebody talk about Ed in the past tense now, I cringe a little bit because I think he's still looking the other way. And I sort of realized in the last month or so how much I learned from Ed when he was here, but didn't realize I learned it until recently. So some examples of that are what an exceptional leader and caring mentor he was, which is something that we've heard a lot. But while I was producing this show, I realized people would come to me in ways that I didn't realize that I was going to him. So in those moments, I hear Ed's voice giving me the advice of how to behave, how to handle these problems. And one thing that always starts every one of those moments is the way that he always said it to me, where he'd go, "Hey, kid." And then he would lead with some impressive advice that I didn't fully internalize yet. So I have a couple of things that I realized that I've been sharing with others that I realized weren't mine, they were him, that he gave to me. So if you guys could help me out, if you could just say, "Hey, kid," when I point to you, I'll share with you some of the things that he has shared with me that I hope to take into my future career along the way. So, do you want it perfect or do you want it by Tuesday? The answer is always by Tuesday. I find it actually pretty fitting that we've heard the references to Tuesday the last amongst the room so far today, and it's Tuesday today. That's a fun thing. So, simplicity at the forefront. Prioritize others by empowering them rather than trying to carry their burden. If you're not having fun, you're probably doing it wrong. Keep learning. If you're the smartest person in the room, you need to seek out new rooms. So, as much as I believe, and we all believe, that Ed was a visionary, I still believe it in this moment as I stand in front of you, because I still realize how much I'm learning from him even when he's not here. So I hope to do the same thing that Ed has done, and I'm very, very excited to learn what I don't even realize I've learned from him yet. Love you, guy.
Edward Bleier is here. He's a former television executive at ABC and Warner Brothers. His new book is The Thanksgiving Ceremony, New Traditions for America's Family Feast. It provides a brief history of Thanksgiving traditions. I am pleased to have him here at this table for the first time, and especially because of this book and the time that we are now about to celebrate. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
Tell me why you I'm surprised that my friend would come to me and say, I've written a book about Thanksgiving, and I want you to take a look at it.
Well, there are two things behind this book. The personal motivation is I'm first-generation American.
Right.
My grandparents suffered. My parents worked hard. I was lucky. I made out. I'm extremely grateful to this country. And I worked long and hard and wanted to put back, and I thought this was one way to put back. And it's a small book with two ambitions. The first is to have it as a template for a ceremony that goes around the table on Thanksgiving Day. Everybody recites something, whether it's what I wrote or the New Testament or the Old Testament.
So if you could have this book at the table, it can enhance the Thanksgiving celebration.
Oh, there's a formal ceremony of 20-odd minutes.
Right.
And then there are 40 pages of things you know, of poems and songs and the hymns.
Where did the ceremony come from?
I wrote it.
Yeah, a ceremony you created based on what?
Based on the history of the holiday, based on writings about the holiday. Some of the contributors were named Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson and Martin Luther King. And the hardest thing is to get permissions to use the Lord's Prayer.
Is that
because
right?
you have to get permission from the publisher who put it out.
So you set out to, because you love the ceremony as a first-generation American, deeply thankful for the good fortune that come to you and your family.
And as Bill Safire says in the introduction, it turned into a holiday with a great meal and football and no theme to the dinner. The dinner needs a theme, and I thought the ceremony would provide that theme.
All right. Here's what's in here. I mean, first of all, for my wife, Magda Palacci. She brought me love and a wonderful family after mine was gone, and she rekindled the gratitude of yet another generation of new Americans for the opportunities of this great ceremony. Then Bill Safire goes on to write the foreword. The notion of putting this together, I mean, with all kinds of endorsements from Julie Nixon, Eisenhower, and Steven Spielberg, who said, over the years, I've had so many Thanksgiving dinners with Ed and Magda that when Ed Bleier talks turkey, all of us listen. Where did you find all the inspirational quotes? I mean, how'd you go about putting this together?
Oh, I just researched. I mean, there were some that were obvious, but I wanted the book to be non-sectarian, multiracial, interdenominational. So I said, does Maya Angelou have something that fits?
Yeah.
How do I research the Quran and find something that fits? The Baha'i. The Pilgrims weren't good to the Native Americans. How do I find Native American material?
Well, stop there. Where do you find Native American material?
I just researched the library and drilled down. I can't tell you precisely where these came from.
Yeah.
But it was a job of research, and that was the most gratifying part of it.
Now, your objective here is what?
Two objectives. The superficial, obvious objective is to have this at every table and to have people resonate by reading from it and going around the table. The second, which is much more political. Civil discourse has become uncivil in this country. I would like to feel that at least for 30 minutes on Thanksgiving Day, no matter who we are, we're on the same page. And there's been so much antagonism lately, and it's growing, it's not diminishing, that I wanted to find something that was bipartisan, multiracial, and that wasn't Pollyannish.
If anything, well, you know, there's always an element of Pollyannish, I think, about Thanksgiving in a sense of being grateful, but also deeply soulful as well. You list the 102 people who came over on the Mayflower.
Right.
To show what? To show that the people who came here for freedom, they came here
only half of them did.
Yeah.
Half of them were the Puritans. They came for their religious freedom. But then they were as rigid about other people's religious practices as the Reformed Church was toward theirs. The other half who came were just coming to America to be farmers or planters or
just looking for a new opportunity.
New opportunity. And to get along, they did the Mayflower Compact, which preceded the Constitution. So there's symbolic American history in Thanksgiving.
Here's what I feel from you. You know, and I think you said, there is more a sense of you feeling at Thanksgiving a spirit, a passion for recapturing a spirit more than anything else.
Absolutely.
For you.
The spirit of America that I think got lost. I mean, we've had this wonderful mythology of tolerance and equality, and we brought millions of people in chains. Signs said Irish and Papists need not apply. That's American history. Hopefully we're past that today. And there are other divisions today, but they're largely political, irrespective of origin. This is a holiday of origins, and that's what we celebrate. But the other traditions were interesting. George Washington started it with a proclamation. Jefferson thought the proclamation was too pious. He thought it violated church and state, so Jefferson wouldn't issue a national proclamation. And it wasn't until Lincoln, for political reasons, with Seward writing a very pious proclamation.
He was a war secretary at that time?
War secretary. Right. And Seward was very religious, and Lincoln was not very religious. That it became a national holiday, and Lincoln's motivation was union.
So it became a national holiday during Lincoln's
time.
Tenure.
And he wanted to supersede the respective governors from issuing statewide proclamations. Remember, the war was fought with state militias.
Right.
And it was fought over secession, and Lincoln's concept of union was so overpowerful, he said, we're going to make Thanksgiving the united proclamation. Emma Lazarus, give me your weak, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. That's inscribed on the Statue of Liberty.
The Thanksgiving ceremony, new traditions for America's family feast. Edward Bleier, with a foreword by William Safire. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Good to see you.
Overture, curtain lights, this is it, the night of nights. No more rehearsing and nursing apart. We know every part by heart. Overture, curtain lights, this is it. We'll hit the heights, and oh, what heights we'll hit. On with the show, this is it. What heights we'll hit. On with the show, this is it.
The year is 1961. Years before, way before Ed Bleier became my brother-in-law, thanks to a lot of happy coincidences, he had nearly as happy an influence on my life. I was a little kid growing up in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and back in those days, there was no Cartoon Network. There was no Disney Channel. We had 4 stations back there and didn't know any better. Ed convinced the powers that be at ABC to take the library of old Warner Brothers Looney Tunes cartoons collecting dust on some shelf somewhere and put those same cartoons on TV on Saturday mornings. All those great cartoons that up to that point had only been shown in movie theaters before the main feature. Just put them on TV Saturday mornings. And not too long after that, even one night a week at 7:30. For a little kid at that time, this was a big deal. Speaking for all the little kids growing up in the early 1960s, we, and I speak also for my brother who's here today and my sister who's not, who were in front of that black and white TV, we were appreciative. Later on, when Ed talked and wrote about this, he said, it was just good business, and it was. But for all those children, like my brother and myself and my sister, huddled up in front of their black and white TV sets on Saturday morning in America in 1961, it was way more than that. Ed celebrated those classic Looney Tune cartoons, and so did we. He was also onto something fundamental. Fast forward 30 years to 1991, and 6-year-old Henry Blechman was appreciative, and he didn't even know what appreciative meant. 5 years later, his younger brother Philip was appreciative and watching also Tiny Toons and Animaniacs and Peaky and the Brain. More on those cartoons later. Which brings us to today, 2024, and Henry's daughter and Ed's grandniece, Bree, who is soon to be 4 years old. Bree is, I think, ready to graduate from Daniel Tiger and Dino Ranch, close, to Bugs Bunny. And safe to say, she's gonna love Bugs Bunny. What's up, Doc, indeed. Back to 1961, and 3 years before one of Ed's media idols, Marshall McLuhan, who we've heard of earlier, coined the phrase, "The medium is the message." It was Ed who delivered that very message to millions of children in the United States and eventually around the world. As it turned out, all those kids craving all those great Warner Brothers cartoons were not the only ones who were appreciative. Also appreciative were the creators of those cartoons, the Tex Averys and Fritz Freelings, Robert McKimson, Bob Clampett, and Chuck Jones, and of course Mel Blanc, the voice of Bugs Bunny and countless other Looney Tunes characters. The middle panel shows a thank you note from Chuck Jones to Ed just after, I believe, Ed's birthday in October 1990, or might be before. I don't know. Anyway, he writes, "For Ed, who brought us all out, dusted us, and polished us to look presentable in this day and age." You might recognize the scene above the note from Chuck's cartoon masterpiece, What's Opera Doc? The cartoon gel on the right is from Fritz Freeling to Ed, no date on the cell, to Ed Bleier, who deserves the Oswald more than Bugs or Daffy. Sincerely, Fritz. 20 years into Ed's stewardship of the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes cartoon library, these cartoon geniuses offered this document and proclamation to one Edward Bleier, who by then was the president of Warner Brothers Television. I'll share a few of these with you. Whereas Ed Bleier is celebrating the occasion of his 20th year with Warner Brothers Animation, and whereas Ed Bleier's leadership and initiative has spanned 2 decades of extraordinary success for Warner Brothers Animation, and where he has selflessly served to uphold the cause of Looney Tunery. And because of his cool wit and mild manner, Ed Bleier has helped propel Bugs Bunny and the whole gang of classic cartoons to the longest running television success in history. And whereas Edward Bleier, network nemesis, has hipped, hopped, and rollicked his way to a spectacular sales record, and whereas his zany spark provided the inspiration for 19 network primetime specials, and whereas Ed Bleier, alias the Big Guy, during his 20-year reign, has ruled over the creation of 5 full-length theatrical features and has promoted excellence in children's programming throughout his distinguished career. And now, therefore, be it proclaimed that Warner Brothers Animation presents this plaque in tribute to Ed Bleier for the many accomplishments of his long and outstanding career. Thank you, Ed. As no date, yes, go ahead. As no date is indicated on this proclamation, we can all assume that it was granted, like all those priceless Looney Tunes, in perpetuity.
I first met Ed Bleier actually on a Tuesday night when my dad and I settled in about 1960, I think I was 12 years old, to watch the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show on ABC in prime time. But I officially met him probably, what was that, from 1960 till 1970, a good 10, 15 years later, when I was a junior executive at NBC. Ed was one of the most generous, innovative, and kind executives, people in the world. He was what you would describe as a true mensch. The way he supported his people, the way he loved the business that he was in, he loved life, and he was bigger than life in so many ways. He was also probably the most amazing salesperson you could ever possibly meet. It was in the late 70s when Ed was doing pay-per-view. He was inventing pay-per-view at Warner Brothers. which then, of course, makes me cringe every time I have to pay for streaming service. But at any rate, he was very successful with the pay-per-view business, but he also oversaw the Looney Tunes library, 900 cartoons, classic cartoons with Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, all the best. And Ed decided to sell, resell, package, repackage over and over again, 900 cartoons to great success. It was, at the time, I was then at NBC, and CBS had the cream of the crop of the old cartoons. CBS had the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show, which I think was the highest rated show on Saturday mornings at the time. And Ed somehow convinced the people at NBC to buy The Leftovers. And we put together a show called The Daffy Speedy Show, because he convinced us it would be a huge hit, but it wasn't. But the upside of it was that I got to know Ed. And because of that, 4 years later, or maybe not even that long, he hired me to move to Warner Brothers. And so I started packaging and repackaging those same cartoons. But he had also expanded the world of Warner Brothers Animation at that time by bringing in Chuck Jones and Friz Freleng, the legends of the animation world. And we were putting together little bits and pieces to make specials for CBS. Chuck and Friz adored Ed, and Ed adored them. And that was sort of the legacy of Ed Bleier, the way he enveloped you into his world and took you on and made you better than you knew you could be. As Way goes on to Way, it was 4 years later that I was offered a job at Hanna-Barbera. And Ed was even supportive at that when I went to him and told him that I thought I needed to make a change. And I went on to Hanna-Barbera and then eventually to Marvel Productions, where I learned how to do mass television production. So it was back in then 1988, I believe it was, when I was at Marvel, that Ed Bleier finally, he called me out of the blue and he said, listen, we are in the process of developing a movie idea with Steven Spielberg. It's called Tiny Toon Adventures, and it's going to be Looney Tunes done for a new generation. And what we really would like to do is turn it into a television series. How would you feel about coming back to Warner Brothers and heading that up? Sounds like a good idea to me. So I took that job. And indeed, we went from 15 to 150 people within 6 months. We put together a great production staff, all of this with Ed's support, with his understanding, with his wisdom, with his knowledge. And Tiny Toon Adventures then premiered 20 months later in syndication all over not just the country, but also the world, and became not only a critical success, but a commercial success. And to this day, Tiny Toon Adventures is actually still in production. They're doing a new series of shows for, I believe, for syndication. And it was the most amazing time of my life. And I thank Ed Bleier for that. Ed's support of his people, his love for his business. And, you know, you think about that big mass of a man of Ed Bleier who loved Bugs Bunny. And it brings tears to your eyes. He was a great man. I miss him greatly, and I'm forever grateful to him for my career. Thank you.
Ed had a groundbreaking life. And as you all know, he was a senior advisor to Steve Ross during the Camelot Warner Brother years that I'm so lucky to have been a part of, in knowing Steve and Courtney and knowing Ed and Magda and working with Ed for a number of years, where Ed was sort of my boss not sort of my boss, Ed was my boss with Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs and Freakazoid and Pinky and the Brain. And he championed those series and did so much for everybody at Warner Brothers, especially for after our movies and television shows finished their television and theatrical run, Ed was a net that caught us and gave us more years of life, financial life, and popular life by finding other ways of selling our films and television shows around the world. I mean, Ed, when I hear MTV, when I hear the Movie Channel, when I hear Nickelodeon, I think of Ed. I mean, Ed was such a huge cog in the wheel that Steve Ross put into motion when he took over Warner Brothers. And I just value my friendship with Ed and Magda, and I miss Ed, and I just, think he did so much for my life, and certainly he's done so much for all of your lives. But the greatest thing he gave me was his support, and the thing I value the most that Ed gave me was his friendship. God bless you, Ed.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please join us in the 3 other rooms next door for finger foods, champagne, and White Castle.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I never knew. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak, and I seem to find the happiness I see when we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Yes, heaven, I'm in heaven, and the cares that hung around me through the week seems to vanish like a gambler's lucky streak. When we out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I'd love to climb to mountain, reach the highest peak, but it doesn't thrill me half as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I'd love to go out fishing in a river or a creek, but I don't enjoy it half as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Now, mama, dance with me. I want my arms about you, the charms about you will carry me through. Yes, heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak, and I seem to find the happiness I seek when we out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Take it, Ella, swing it.
Heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak, and I seem to find the happiness I seek when we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Heaven, I'm in heaven, and the cares that hung around me through the week seem to vanish like a gambler's lucky streak when we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I'd love to climb a mountain and to reach the highest peak, but it doesn't thrill me half as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I love to go out fishing in a river or a creek, but I don't enjoy it half as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Come on and dance with me. I want my arm about you. The charm about you will carry me through to heaven. I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak, and I seem to find the happiness I seek when we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek.
Yes,
dance with me. I want my arms about you. The charm about you will carry me through to heaven. I'm in heaven. And my heart beats so that I can hardly speak. And I seem to find the happiness I seek when we're out together, dancing cheek to cheek, cheek to cheek, cheek to cheek, cheek to cheek.
It's very clear our love is here to stay, not for a year, but ever and a day. The radio and the telephone and the movies that we know may just be passing fancies, and in time may go. But oh my dear, our love is here to stay. Together we're going a long, long way. In time the Rockies may crumble, Gibraltar may tumble, they're only made of clay, but our love is here to stay. Telephone and the movies that we know may just be passing fancies, and in time may go. But oh my dear, love is here to stay. Together we're going a long, long way. In time the Rockies may crumble and Gibraltar it may tumble, they're only made of clay, but our love is here to stay.
Hold me close and hold me fast, the magic spell you cast. This is La Vie en Rose. When you kiss me, heaven sighs, and though I close my eyes, I see La Via. When you press me to your heart, I'm in a world apart, a world where roses bloom. And when you speak, angels sing from above. Everyday words seem to turn into love songs. Give your heart and soul to me, and life will always be La Vie en Rose. La da da dee, la da dee da da da. Everyday words seem to turn into love songs. Give your heart and soul to me, and life will always be La Vie en
Made up my mind to live in memory of the lonesome time. I can't stop wanting you. It's useless to say, so I'll just live my life in dreams of yesterday. Dreams of yesterday. Those happy hours that we once knew, though long ago, it still make me blue. They say that time heals a broken heart, but time has stood still since we've been apart. Made up my mind to live in memories of the lonesome time. I can't stop wanting you. It's useless to say, so I'll just live my life in dreams of yesterdays. Those happy hours, those happy hours that we once knew, that we once knew. Though long ago, still make me blue. They say that
time. Sing the song, children.
I can't stop wanting you.
It's useless to say, so I'll just live my life of dreams of